So our next presentation is the cyber threat to critical infrastructure. I want to introduce the presenter, and then we've got some additional information that's going to be presented by Paul Joyal, who's just came off of the National Board and has been a very strong leader in this area for InfraGard. He's got a few words to say as well. So our next presenter is Mr. Brett Leatherman. Brett is the Assistant Section Chief for the FBI's Cyber Division. He manages all FBI public-private sector engagement. He previously served as a supervisory special agent in Eurasia for cyber operations for that unit, managing some of the most sophisticated nation-state cyber campaigns. Prior to the FBI, he was a director of information technology. He holds undergraduate degree in computer information systems and holds several cyber certifications. He's also an FBI pilot and a hostage negotiator. So if you want to get out early today, he's your guy to talk to. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Paul Joyal up to do some further introductions for our speaker, Brett Leatherman.
Thanks. Thank you, Jerry. It's a great pleasure to introduce Brett. Brett is a true professional, not only in the FBI, but within the entire U.S. intelligence community and is well known internationally. I want to emphasize one point. I think what he brings to the table today is a unique understanding of the type of combined threat that we face. While Brett was supervisory special agent in that Eurasian division, he came into contact very closely with the nexus that we fight against, which is the criminal organization and the state-sponsored intelligence services, and how these two groups interplay, especially in Russia. EMP and EMP attack philosophy falls under the rubric of information warfare in Russian military doctrine. That also includes cyber. It also includes information ops. But they have a holistic understanding of this. The first step, as the Chinese say, it comes well before military operations. It's in this area, the EMP, the cyber operations, to cripple the will of the opponent to resist. This is the essential nature. Brett has seen these capabilities close up. You're going to see a fascinating presentation. Obviously, SCADA and the electrical network is in the crosshairs of these services. It's a great pleasure to introduce Brett to you today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the great unexpected introduction, Paul, and I appreciate your guys' time and allowing the FBI to come out and talk to you about kind of the cyber threat landscape, both as we see it from an investigative agency and a USIC, a U.S. intelligence community agency, as well as from our incident response capabilities. So I always like to give a brief introduction of how I joined the FBI in 2003, because it kind of shows also where the FBI has developed in our cyber capabilities. I joined in 2003. My wife and I lost a good friend in the World Trade Centers on 9/11. And like many, that was kind of my call to action. I had always wanted to become an FBI agent, and I applied at that point and was accepted. I had a computer background. I came in under the cyber background for the FBI as an agent. So I went to the FBI Academy expecting that they were going to utilize my cyber expertise as terrorists, criminals, spies were utilizing technology more and more often to commit their acts, their criminal acts. So of course I get to the FBI Academy. 6 months later I graduate, and I was thrown for 10 years into the violent crime program. So I did get a great chance to work violent crime and other criminal acts over the course of 10 years, and really started to learn the degree to which these actors, again, whether they're intelligence officers, terrorists, criminals, child predators, some of the worst folks that we face here in society who want to do us harm and hurt us, they are utilizing technology more and more, and that was in 2003. That is certainly true of what we face in 2015. So what I want to do is kind of give you an overview of the threat as we see it in general, as well as to ICS SCADA. When I was in the Eurasia Cyber Ops Unit, I got to work a lot of these nation-state campaigns against the United States, and the implications are real of cyber warfare. And so hoping to give you an optic here and then maybe take a few questions if we have time at the end. So, as we all know, those who are in risk management know, those net defenders know what is risk. It really comes down to the equation threat times vulnerability, right? Without a threat actor, if you can have all the vulnerabilities on your network in the world, but you're safe. Without a vulnerability on your network, you can have all the threat actors in the world, and by and large, you're safe. However, it's when that threat meets that vulnerability that you have some kind of exploitation. That's what we learned working these cases. Unfortunately, most folks look at this from a prevention standpoint. 90% of the money we put into this effort is on prevention, 10% on detection. And what we're trying to encourage is that you really have to balance that out a little bit more. The adage right now in cybersecurity is prevention when able, but detection is a must. You have to be able to detect that threat actor rapidly when that exploitation happens. And I'll talk a little bit more about why. So, threat times vulnerability, let's take a look at who some of the threat actors are. And really, as I move from category to category, although you see these go from kind of least sophisticated in their capabilities to most sophisticated, the implications are still significant. So the first category is the hacktivists. The hacktivists desire to perpetuate their cause, their belief system, based on their capabilities to affect change. Social injustice right now is a big cause for them. In fact, I read this morning that over 1,000 officials attending a climate summit in Paris had their personal identifiable information released by Anonymous. They allegedly released the information out there. They're not monetizing that. They're doing that for a reason. They're trying to out those individuals to perpetuate their cause. Unfortunately, we've seen that a lot in our dialogue domestically with U.S. law enforcement officers. A lot of people say, hey, these hacktivists are just defacing web pages. What does that really do? And that, in fact, is gone well beyond defacing web pages. Hacktivists now are changing the way we police our communities, and they're really changing the dialogue here. Even though their techniques aren't as sophisticated as some of the other actors, the implications are significant. If you look at the fact that the FBI put out a publication saying that hacktivists were targeting U.S. law enforcement personnel, this was back earlier this year. It still holds true today. We have police officers in communities right now, Baltimore, Ferguson, and elsewhere, where we have a significant dialogue in our communities about how the police police their communities, those that they serve. There's a significant dialogue going on, but what effect happens when you have a police officer serving in one of those departments whose information is obtained by a hacktivist group who had no involvement in a particular incident other than he serves on that department? This hacktivist group is able to obtain his information, the information on his family, specifically a daughter who's in Little League soccer, and releases that information. In today's day and age, when we're dealing with ISIS threats and everything else, that information is released on the internet, and now the entire internet knows where this police officer's daughter goes to school, plays soccer, and by the way, she's going to be on this field on this day wearing this jersey number. All that can be mined via social media, school websites, athletic websites. When these hacktivists pull all that together and they release that, they're really changing the dialogue in the way we police our community. Same thing with the airlines right now. A lot of the airlines will tell you, you've got a lot of hacktivists engaged in Twitter and social media campaigns to actually ground aircraft in flight based on threats that they can perpetuate, realistically perpetuate, by mining data publicly available. So this is a significant concern for us. The next category is the criminals out there who just take information for the sole purpose of monetizing it for their own benefit. They want to commit this exfiltration of data, whether it's PII, PHI, take that information and either sell it on the black web or monetize it in some other way, shape, or form. So we had a recent intrusion a few months ago that's sparked a lot of dialogue around dinner tables here in America. Anybody heard of the Ashley Madison attack? So you had a lot of conversation around dinner tables because of that. Let me ask you, when we look at these threat actors, we look at the intent behind them. Would a hack like that fall under a criminal attack? Certainly there are criminal implications there, or would it fall under a hacktivist attack? Their goal was to shut down the website. Their goal was to take that information, use it as blackmail, and shut the website down. That portion of the attack, because of their intent, they weren't looking at selling the information, blackmailing folks. That part of the hack was a hacktivist attack based on the intent behind it. So we always look at the intent behind the actors. Now, plenty of criminal hackers jumped on the bandwagon after that because now they've released the information of these folks who were out there doing this, engaged in this activity. So then the criminal actors are able to get that information, pull additional information, and go after individuals on the website to blackmail them. That's an example of a criminal attack. It's the intent behind it. Now, the insider threat, the reason I put that in kind of the middle of all these threat actors is we have two things. We have knowing and unknowing insiders affecting cyber network defense within our networks. So still, the number one way networks are compromised, whether it's in ICS SCADA, energy networks, many times classified networks, unclassified networks, theft of trade secrets, is through spear phishing or social engineering. So still, that trusted insider is still the means by which these threat actors exploit the vulnerability and get into the network because we're not managing access, privileged access to our networks appropriately. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But it's that trusted insider. Now, the insider provides the keys to the kingdom. Your data, the data you hold in that network, the capabilities that those control systems have to manipulate controls and other things are all held within the network, and you have users who have access to that, and the threat actors know it. So if it's a nation state, a cyber espionage campaign, a criminal actor, they're looking at those insiders for access into the network. In the old days, you used to have the old spy versus spy days. You had Robert Hansen, one of the most notorious spies, unfortunately coming from our organization, who spied for the Russians. And the Russians worked very hard, in his case and every other case, to develop a relationship with him because of the information, the knowledge, and the data that he had ultimately. They wanted the data which would hurt us from a national security standpoint and give them a national security advantage over us. So they spent months, weeks, years cultivating that relationship, and it was hit or miss. What I'm going to tell you today is that what we've seen over the last few years is these same threat actors who can sit in Moscow or elsewhere will spend the same amount of time identifying who in your networks have that access that the old human intelligence sources had. And they're going to target them in the same way. They're going to look at their LinkedIn. They're going to look at their Facebook. We see them doing it every day. They're going to craft very believable social engineering campaigns, and they're going to get them eventually to click on a link, which could provide access to malware to exploit your network. So the actors are doing it. They just don't have the cost of business of doing it because they can sit right in their agency's network and still target U.S. personnel. We get to the cyber espionage campaigns. Right now, this is crippling a lot of our private sector businesses who hold critical information, trade secret information that's going overseas, and all the research and development dollars that we've put in a lot recently within our energy networks are now going over and are freely obtained by these other competitors overseas. So the espionage campaigns, those actors are very involved in the advanced persistent threat. This is where you go from just exploiting a network, popping somebody's email account, getting in and exfiltrating information, to actually getting in the network and setting up persistence within that network. The goal of an APT is to get in there, set up alternate communications with the threat actor, get in there quietly, and again, once they breach the network, it's not like they're going to go after your data within days or weeks. They're going to spend time within that network enumerating what the hosts are, what the other servers in the network. Am I in a ICS SCADA system? Am I in a point of sale system? Am I in an email server? And how does this network connect to the keys to the kingdom? How do I get, if I'm in a business network, how do I get to the SCADA devices? If I'm a cyber espionage actor, or worse, a terrorist, or worse, a nation state looking to pre-position themselves for warfare, how do I get into that network and pre-position myself for illicit activity? And so when we talk about prevention and detection in the cyber threat, you cannot prevent, and that's just the truth. And I go out and I talk to a lot of CEOs and board of directors and folks who say, how can the FBI help us prevent this? What can my IT personnel do to prevent a breach? And don't get me wrong, prevention is still important. We can prevent a significant amount of low-hanging fruit attacks. But if an APT actor wants to get into your network, based on my experience working these cases and responding to incidents, they're going to get into your network. The key is detecting it. I mentioned that I used to work criminal violations for the FBI. One of the violations I used to work for a number of years was kidnappings. Very, very difficult cases to work. But you knew as soon as you got that call that a child went missing, you knew that it was that you weren't playing around. You had to bring the troops in mass, and you had to find that child. You had 48 to 72 hours. You guys hear that a lot on the TV shows. 48 to 72 hours to find that missing child, because what happens beyond that time frame? Beyond that time frame, evidence degrades. Physical evidence will degrade. Surveillance tape will become overwritten, and you might not see something that you should have seen. Witness recollection degrades over time. So beyond those 72 hours, the chance of finding that child becomes more and more difficult the more time that goes on. The same is true now that I'm working in the APT world and the sophisticated cyber network exploitation world. The same is true here. Your networks are going to get breached. If you don't detect that breach before they escalate privilege, enumerate your network and find where they are and how to get into cross-domains, platforms, get into your SCADA system, get into your point-of-sale network, and then I mentioned escalate privilege. It's at that point that you have really those first few weeks to identify that they're there. What are the changes that happened in my system to find them and kick them out of my network? And that time frame could mean the difference between your company staying in business or going out of business, or networks here in the U.S. In the energy sector staying up or going down. We just did a major exercise. The FBI was part of it. Many of you were probably part of it in the last 2 weeks, called GridX. Have you guys heard of that? The GridX exercise. It brings all energy sector partners from the private sector together across the country, thousands of participants, everybody from the government to partner together and really sit there and game out what happens if there's a cyber network attack, a physical attack, or a terrorist attack on an energy sector system. And it's the recognition of that threat early on that it's going to keep the lights on or keep the lights out, unfortunately. Then we look at kind of the vulnerability. So we looked at the threat actor standpoint, the intent behind what these threat actors want to do. Again, when we're talking about intent, what's scary to me as an FBI agent working in the national security realm, and we're kind of blessed and cursed at the same time because we get to work the criminal standpoint of these cases and put these guys in jail. And where we can't put them in jail, we have Title 50 authorities that allow us to utilize our national security authorities. What's scary to me is the recognition that these actors are intent in some cases to sit on an energy sector network and not exfiltrate any information. And what does that mean when you have a sophisticated APT sitting on a PLC or an HMI within the energy sector and there's no data being exfiltrated? Why is that piece of malware there? That's obviously a concern to us as well. Could that mean pre-positioning of malware on that device for potential wartime capability? That's, from our standpoint, that's what we have to mitigate, protect, and defend against. And so that's what keeps us busy in the FBI, within DHS, in the rest of our partners in DOD and elsewhere, is how do we ensure we find that malware that has complete remote capability to manipulate the system and work with our private sector partners to kick it out of the network. So, some current and emerging attack vectors as we see it right now. Really, the supply chain has become huge. If you guys see on here, I've got Energetic Bear, Black Energy campaigns. 2 major campaigns last year affecting ICS SCADA devices. Black Energy had the ability to manipulate the human-machine interface on all these energy sector networks, Siemens, WinCC, as well as 2 other HMIs within the energy sector. It allowed them to basically pop those computers that obtain the HMIs and manipulate controls within the ICS SCADA system. And what's interesting is Dragonfly, Energetic Bear, another campaign, was one of the first campaigns to actually weaponize a software update to PLC devices within the ICS SCADA networks. Now, as network defenders, and I used to work in network defense in the private sector, as network defenders, we're taught to do what when we identify a vulnerability? Patch it, right? Patch, patch, patch. That's our mantra. Let's get in there, patch the vulnerability as soon as we can. Well, what happens when you have a threat actor who knows there's a vulnerability on PLCs within the energy sector network? They know that there's a patch available for it, and they know the energy sector is going to rush to get this patch to patch the PLCs. Why not, if you're sophisticated enough, weaponize that patch so that when they patch a legitimate vulnerability, they get a pre-positioned piece of malware on there as well. So the Energetic Bear campaign was one of the first campaigns to do that. I did also put on there an old Cessna control panel because I'm a pilot as well. I learned on steam gauges. A lot of these new platforms, aircraft platforms that carry over 500 passengers, have over 1,000 pieces of unique firmware and software on that airframe. So how do you validate and test that firmware and software to ensure its integrity? And then how do you validate the updates to every individual piece of firmware and software on that platform to ensure that there's no Energetic Bear malware or otherwise on there as well? Scary stuff. So that's what we're trying to talk to private sector. You have the ingenuity in private sector. You guys are the innovators. Let's work together to try to determine how we standardize patch management. We ensure integrity is there during the patch management process. Internet of Things. Everybody's aware of what this is, right? The wearable devices. I just looked at my Apple Watch. You have PANs now instead of LANs. You have PANs, personal area networks. You have the house that CNET is developing right now that is completely connected to the internet, so that if you are driving home from work, your car is talking to your home server, and as soon as you cross a certain point in town, the refrigerator is telling your vehicle to tell you that you only have 4 items, so you can create these 5 dishes for dinner. But if you stop at the grocery store that's 2 miles away and you pick up these additional 3 items, you're going to have a dozen more dishes that you can create. And then the thermostat is going to start warming up certain parts of the house as you get close to the home, so that when you get there, you're comfortable. And as you walk from your vehicle into the house, your Pandora is going to transition into the house so that you hear that music in nonstop fashion. The Internet of Things is creating an expanded attack vector within businesses, within the energy sector, and within ICS SCADA systems. True stories. We've had private sector businesses that have put LED displays, or the LCD displays, on conference rooms throughout their campuses to show events like this, meeting times, who the speaker is, so that participants can go to the different events, look at the LED screen, the LCD screen, and determine where they want to go. And they're centrally connected to the IPv4 space. They're connected to the production network so that the secretary or the receptionist can push to every one of those devices what the updates are. Why do we do that? We do that for convenience, right? Remember this, convenience for us is convenience for the bad guys as well. These devices were running Android operating systems that were not being patched because they just thought these are LCD screens. Why worry about this in the grand scheme of things? Well, we had threat actors exploit the Android operating system within those LCDs, and they were able to then enumerate hosts within the production network and move laterally. Now, how do you want to be that CISO? Do you want to be that CISO or that security officer who explains that we weren't patching the LCDs and that's how they stole this critical information within our network? So we also had another instance of a burger kiosk within a university campus that was running the kiosk so that students could order burgers within the cafeteria, connected again to the IPv4 space. And we had the threat actors exploit that kiosk and be able to move laterally through the network. So it's recognizing what devices we're connecting. Do we need to connect these things? And what are we doing to secure these devices if we're connecting them to our production networks? Trusted third party has become huge. Who has access to our network? A lot of people now have partnerships where they have direct access into other people's data centers. So how are we creating service level agreements that protect us from a partner who may not have the security requirements that we have? The energy sector has done a pretty good job in the last probably 2 years at increasing their defenses against cyber adversaries. What we've seen is some of the third-party intermediaries have not done such a good job. So even though the companies are spending significant amounts of money and dollars on network defense for the corporation, the threat actors still want to exploit the path of least resistance. So if there's a small mom and pop shop that's managing their email services and have connectivity to their network, we're seeing them exploited, and they then have trusted access into the corporate network and they're able to then move into the ICS SCADA environment, or in some cases, the business networks. And then, of course, we have the expanded attack surface of this whole idea of bring your own device, the cloud environment, the infrastructure as a service, services as a service, and software as a service, the whole movement to the cloud. We've gone from data centers and energy sector networks that are brick and mortar and hardly defined to this robust, dispersed group of people carrying laptops, tablets, cell phones, all of which are personal devices and connect to the network without two-factor authentication, which allows additional footprint and additional avenues of compromise. So, risk mitigation. I know I'm running low on time, so I'm going to hit some of the top points on here so I can maybe take a few questions if you have them. And I'm really going to focus on preparing, prevention, and detection, because my understanding is there's not a lot of net defenders here. And once we get into isolate, contain, respond, and recover, we're talking about incident response. So when it comes to preparing, the biggest thing I can say is develop plans beforehand. Develop your incident response plan beforehand and include all lines of business. I can't tell you how many times we go to an electric company and say, hey, we've got intel from a national security source that your network has a problem. And we get sent away, or this could be any corporation, we get sent away for the next 3 to 4 days as the lawyers and the CEOs and the outside counsel and the net defenders and the IT department talk about what information they can provide to law enforcement, how they're going to redact the information. And what did I tell you about the importance of detection and exfiltrating that compromise early on? If we're out of the picture for 3 to 5 days because you guys are worrying about an incident response plan, there's no telling what the threat actors are doing. Unfortunately, a lot of corporations then, within band, what we call in band, will then send email communications all over the place on that same compromised network. The FBI was just here. We got an issue on the SCADA network or the point of sale network. What are we going to do? What can we share? And the threat actors are going, all right, let's pre-position here, let's go here, and they're just kind of following everything around. So really having that incident response plan early on and including all lines of business is critical in mitigating that threat. Prevention, I'll tell you, these are the top ways you can prevent. So many companies we go to spend millions of dollars on software that help them do all sorts of neat things. Take out encryption, look at encryption, repackage encrypted technology and send it back out, communications. This is what you need to do because they're spending all this money, but they're not looking at the fundamental ways to protect their networks. Patch management. You've got to ensure that your operating systems and your software are up to date, especially as we talk about the amount of devices in our networks that are now utilizing software. It's important that we are centralizing the management process and ensuring the integrity of the patches that we're putting out there. Classifying, segregating data. There's too many businesses out there that have email servers on the same enclave as their customers' PII. You've got to classify and segregate that data. Privileged access management, if you get nothing else out of this presentation, if your organization is not using two-factor authentication for remote access and admin access to your network, you've got to implement that. I talked earlier about how the threat actors will escalate privilege, and too many companies have network admins, CEOs, and others who surf the internet from the same device they use to manage critical systems within their network. So you've got to be able to de-escalate privileges, only use those privileges where needed, and use two-factor when you employ it. And then application whitelisting. Detection, it comes down to basically getting an eye on your network and creating a baseline so that your log files are telling you what they need to tell you. You need to know, if you're in the energy sector, you need to have a baseline of what that ICS SCADA system, what kind of traffic is coming from the HMI to the PLCs and back, so that if there's any anomaly, you can detect that anomaly. There's two ways to do it. We can do it through signature-based analysis, which is important, but you have to have behavior-based analysis in anomalies as well. This is a report from ICS CERT. This is the importance of detection. In reports last year, ICS CERT had 245 incidents reported to them in the ICS SCADA community, in the energy control system community. Of those reports, 38% had an unknown vector of compromise. So we can't say how those attacks got into the network. That tells me there's no detection technology in place. We're not detecting that threat actor, which means from a law enforcement perspective, we might have an idea of who it is, but we can never prosecute them. We can never attribute this to a nation-state actor because there's no detection in place. Log files are probably being overwritten, and there's not much we can do with it. And then this all revolves around partnerships. I talk about GridX, and one of the programs I've had the privilege to manage over the last year is the InfraGard program. And I'm very proud of what our folks do here in InfraGard with private sector, public sector partnerships. I can't encourage you in the private sector more, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with the group here, to engage with your local FBI field office, your DHS personnel, and your other partners within the various ISACs and other organizations to share threat intel, best practices, and to talk about the threat landscape as you see it. So, I think I'm hitting up against my window here. I appreciate your time. I think I've got a few minutes for questions if anybody has any. Got one front and center here.
When I buy organic food, I see USDA certified organic. Is there a way when I want to pick my bank, I can have it tell me it is FBI certified data protection? That is to say, what can the FBI do? I gave one example that perhaps in my simple mind seems like a real thing, to make this, to give the consumer the information I need to select what bank, what utility, whatever I want to give my business to. Or if I'm a bank, what cloud do I want to give my business to?
So let me go.
And then related to that is what legislation would you want to see happen to help make sure that things you want to prevent are easier to prevent or detect?
So the first question for those I think who are remote is what recommendations can the FBI provide based on what we see towards products or services? The answer to that in short is, let me tell you, although we see this from a threat landscape perspective, what our primary mission in our organization is investigation and attribution. We only have within the FBI approximately 14,000 special agents assigned across the world to work counterterrorism and every other program. 35 to 40,000 personnel total. New York Police Department has about 35,000 people in New York City alone. So we've got a little bit of a task. That's not part of our primary mission, is to actually vet products and provide some kind of seal of approval for it, unfortunately. I'd love to have a personal blog where maybe I did that based on my experience, but I'd probably get in trouble. The legislation is the other question. Right now, legislation that we're focused on from our standpoint is the information sharing legislation that's going through. Our ability and private sector's ability to share information with us from a net defense standpoint as well as a cyber defense standpoint without regulatory or other sanctions or implications. Yeah, the question is it one of the solutions that not every critical system needs to be on a network? Tell that to the millennials. I mean, it's like they want to connect everything to the internet and tell everybody where they're at. I'm sorry if you're a millennial. No, I get it. Air gapping is the best solution, in my opinion. There are probably some devices that need to be air gapped from any other network. Unfortunately, people make business decisions outside of security as well, occasionally, and that business decision is what is impacting us. One more? All right. Right up front here.
FBI, they're going to do a great job outreach on the websites. You are not part of the political debate. There's not been a single question asked of any candidate about cybersecurity. You're not part of the congressional discussion. I mean, basically, people are willing to tolerate their computers to be infected because the banks pay off and because insurance companies insure. So the question is, how does the FBI, may not be able to this year, but agency, so go to the private sector, get them to put information on, say, commercials 15 minutes before the debates, so that they're forced to, have awareness on this, because it's not there?
So the question is, how does the FBI engage really from a political standpoint? Let me answer that in two ways. Number one, under the Hatch Act, we can't. We're a U.S. intelligence community agency and a law enforcement agency, so we can't engage in the political conversation really, but we do provide classified. I've been to Congress, the White House, and elsewhere providing classified briefings so that they're aware of the threats we face at the national security level. The candidates get many similar briefings to what others get within our political landscape. What we do in engaging with private sector, though, and if I had more time, I could spend half an hour talking about encryption and the implications of encryption from a privacy standpoint and a national security standpoint, and where that's going, because it's a dangerous area that's going right now. It's a big concern to us in the FBI. It's getting with our private sector partners in the ISACs, within other communities, to talk to them about the implications, and we do that regularly, not really through commercials, but let me tell you, I think I was 3 weeks ago, I was in 7 states in 8 days or 9 days, I think. I mean, we are engaging it with education, critical infrastructure, and elsewhere to make sure they know what we're seeing from an incident response, a law enforcement, and an intelligence standpoint, and trying to make, really breeding an awareness campaign so that private sector can then look at encryption and other implications and come up with some of those solutions or engage in that dialogue as well. So before I get kicked off, I want to thank you guys for your time and your partnership as well, and I look forward to talking to you guys offline maybe about some of this stuff later.